May I please ask the superintendent to call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair, Ms. Bondo,
Présente.
Mr. Burke, Mr. Irish, Senor Rodriguez,
Presente.
Ms. Russell Better,
Present.
Ms. Thompson, Ms. Trevorrow, Mr. Youssef, here. Ms. Allen, Ms. Boxer McCumber, Ms. Chung,
Here.
Ms. Yangala,
Présent.
and Chair Figdor.
Here. Thank you so much. Please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
Under God.
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we are going to start today's meeting, as is customary, with a public comment period. Bear with me for 1 second as I just get set up after our executive session. I do see one hand up, so let me run through the guidelines for public comment, and then we'll get started. So just to be clear, this is an opportunity for the public to comment on any issue that we're not voting on tonight. So in particular, if you want to address the board about our COVID precautions, now would be the time. We'll have an update from the superintendent later in the meeting, but we won't be voting on COVID measures tonight. So as a reminder for how we're going to take public comment from Zoom participants, please use the raise your hand feature provided by Zoom. You can find that either on the webinar control bar at the bottom of your screen or by selecting your name on the participant screen. I'm going to call on your Zoom name, and you have 3 minutes to address the board. Please start with your name and address. So first, we are going to hear from Chuck Lurch. Chuck, you have 3 minutes to address the board. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair Figdor. My name is Chuck Lurch. I live at 73 Payson Street, and I have a daughter who is a junior at Portland High School. On September 7th, the board voted down a resolution to require COVID-19 vaccination for all employees. And the main rationale given for opposing this resolution was the risk of losing staff to other districts that would not have a mandate. And then on September 17th, the Maine DOE announced that the US OSHA vaccination requirements would apply to Maine public schools. With the statewide mandate imminent, there is no reason to delay implementing mandatory vaccinations for staff and also students aged 16 and up for whom the vaccine has been given full FDA approval. Although the vaccination rate in Portland is high, we need to maximize this free, safe, and effective tool to end the pandemic. We are learning from hospital systems and large companies like United that vaccine mandates work and employee attrition is minimal. I also urge the board and district to prepare for vaccinations for ages 5 through 11, which are likely to be approved by the FDA in the coming weeks. The schools will play a key role in educating parents on the benefits of vaccination for kids, schools in our community, and providing clinics to make vaccination as accessible as possible. Finally, please survey students, staff, and parents on their opinions about vaccine intentions and vaccine mandates. This is information that will be invaluable to you as you make difficult decisions for the rest of this school year and next school year. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Appreciate your making the time tonight. Next, we're going to hear from Erin Chase. Erin, you have 3 minutes to address the board. Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. My name is Erin Chase. I live at 6 Steepwood Drive. I have 3 children in Portland schools, 2 at PHS and 1 at Moore. I would like to comment on the challenges Portland is having with hiring and retaining bus drivers and its impact on extracurricular activities. I recognize that this problem isn't unique to Portland, and I understand that you can't immediately fix this issue. I appreciate Portland's effort to increase its transportation staff, and I know this is a difficult situation. I would like the board to consider the unintended consequences of the combination of later school start and end times and a nationwide labor shortage. I would like to bring to your attention that all middle school athletic teams and some high school teams have been greatly impacted by a lack of drivers. Most competitions at middle school level have been canceled. Some junior varsity games have been canceled, and varsity contests have been postponed or rescheduled to a later time. In some scenarios, it may be necessary for high school athletes to drive themselves to games. In combination with the personnel shortage, later end times at some of the elementary schools delay the ability of the drivers we do have to transport teams. Please consider this if the conversation about school start and end times comes up again at the board level later this year. I understand that Portland is working to create a policy that allows private transportation to athletic events, and I applaud that effort. I'm asking that the development and board adoption of this policy be expedited in order to minimize future disruptions. Lastly, I would like to talk about the impact of this problem on Portland's equity goals. For many of our students, the opportunity to participate in athletic events is limited only to school teams. The ability to join a sport creates a feeling of community and inclusion in the school culture, a positive sense of self, and physical and social emotional wellness. When school-based athletic opportunities are limited, you lose these children. While some families can offset this loss with pay-to-play sports, many of Portland's families do not have the resources to continue to foster these opportunities privately, thus continuing the cycle of inequitable educational opportunities. Please support a future policy that allows for families to transport students to athletic events. Also, please consider the economic climate and transportation resources should there be any discussion about changing school start and end times in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Erin. Appreciate your joining us tonight. I do not see any other hands up. So just one last call for anyone who's interested in, any member of the public who's interested in addressing the board tonight on an issue that we are not voting on tonight. Okay, seeing no other hands up, I'm gonna close the public comment and we're gonna move right on to the comments of the chair. And I wanted to start tonight by appreciating our families, staff, and community for working together to make school safe and keep our students learning during this latest and very challenging phase of the pandemic. I'm so relieved to say that we're seeing fewer students who need to quarantine, which indicates that our health and safety protocols are indeed working. Now, more than 72% of our kindergarten through sixth grade students are participating in pooled testing, which is tremendous. And our staff have increased the amount of academic support available to students who do need to quarantine and are making sure they have access to school meals. This is a monumental effort, and I want to acknowledge the strain on our staff, appreciate their steadfast commitment to our students, and acknowledge the success we've had minimizing cases and the number of students and staff who need to quarantine. Later this month, we're holding groundbreaking ceremonies for the Reiki, Przemysl, and Longfellow renovations, which are all underway, as well as a ribbon cutting for the ESSERF school, which has been transformed into a 21st century school. These projects wouldn't have happened without prodding, organizing, and widespread support from the community. So I want to invite the community to attend the events and celebrate these milestones with us as we transform our school buildings into 21st century schools that are more reflective of our community's commitment to the best education possible for our students. Here are the dates and times. The first is the Reiki groundbreaking on Thursday, October 21st at 2:30 p.m. Next is the Przemysl groundbreaking on Friday, October 22nd at 2:30 p.m. The following Thursday, we're holding the ESSERF ribbon cutting. So that's Thursday, October 28th at 2:30. And the last event will be the Longfellow groundbreaking on Friday, October 29th at 1:30 p.m. I hope you can join us to celebrate at these events. Lastly, for my remarks tonight, next Monday is Indigenous Peoples Day. I want to ask the board to consider updating our practices to start each of our meetings with a land acknowledgement. Maria Gerard, Executive Director of Wabanaki Reach, has explained that, quote, recognizing one's place on the landscape has been a native practice and tradition for countless generations. She writes that, quote, land acknowledgement is a simple, powerful way of showing respect and memorializing the spirit of the people who originally were here. It is a step towards correcting stories and practices that have erased Indigenous peoples' history and culture. It is a step towards inviting and honoring the truth of truth-telling. Maria Gerard of Wabanaki Reach suggests that land acknowledgements reflect intent, purpose, and commitment to action. The superintendent has started his remarks with a land acknowledgement at our board meetings for about 2 years. I think it's time for the board to show our respect for the traditional lands of the Wabanaki people and to articulate our commitment to our Indigenous students as well. I hope there's support on the board for making this change this year in honor of Indigenous Peoples Day 2021. Please consider it, my fellow board members, and I'll follow up with each of you about it. Now we move to the report of the students, and tonight we get to hear from Ms. Yangala, who will provide an update from Portland Adult Education. Ms. Yangala, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope my microphone is working. This is the report for fall 2001 at Portland Adult Education. In September, PAE welcomed students to our building for classes for the first time in 18 months. During the weeks of September 13, PAE welcomes 265 students for 2 days of orientation and device distribution. Those students will be studying remotely with the possibility of some in-person activities. There are students in higher level ESL and language arts and workforce classes. The following week, we welcome 625 students for in-person classes. We continue to see many new and returning students. We conduct intakes and testing for 575 students since July, and we have 63 students scheduled for intakes and 63 times. We have 63 students scheduled for intakes at this time. Our waiting list is higher. Our waiting list for English classes is higher than it has ever been. This new relationship with I can't pronounce this word, I'm sorry, North Lights and Hannaford on our outgoing work with Maine Health, First Atlantic, and others. We have many areas of forced work education. Our relationship with area financial institutions have resulted in increased help for students who want to enter in the fields of financial support. And a recent $6,000 donation from Bank of America will provide a lot of support to our workforce program. Last spring, I was one of the 12 students who complete the Child Development Associate classes offered by PAE and the Opportunity Alliance. 7 graduates have been hired to work in childcare facilities, and PAE is still working with students to complete the portfolios and internship hours and prepare for CDA exams. As for myself, I am one of many PAE students who are struggling with life issues. For the past few months, immigration has been a struggle for myself and so many students at PAE. And that concludes my report tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Yangala.
Thank you.
Sorry for the struggles. I hear them. Now we are on to the report of the superintendent, Superintendent Batana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Yangala, it's good to see you, and thank you for that outstanding report on all of the exciting things that are happening at Portland Adult Ed. And I also want to extend my concern and reach out if there's anything that I can do, that we can do collectively as a board to support you in your struggles. Please don't hesitate to let us know.
Thank you.
Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand, the Wolastoqiyik, or Maliseet, the Mi'kmaq, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes known collectively as the Wabanaki Confederacy or People of the Dawnland. We're honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we're committed to making the past, present, and future Wabanaki peoples visible in our schools and classrooms. I believe I've been reading a variation of that for 3 years since the time that we actually started honoring Indigenous Peoples Day, which, as you know, is next Monday. And I hope that all of our staff and students enjoy a well-deserved fall break, and that as we do that, that we take a moment to reflect on the beauty of the Dawnland and pledge to be good stewards of the land in the way that the Wabanaki people have been for almost 3,000 years. So, and I will also say that I would be more than happy to pass the baton for that to the chair, or to have it be part of what we do at the same time that we do the pledge at the beginning of these meetings. So I think that's an excellent idea if we move forward with it. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the family of Paths and Casco Bay custodian Richard Dixon, who passed away late last month. He's survived by his partner, Ginny Linscott, who's also a retired member of our Portland Public Schools family. He's also survived by his brother and family and his many friends. Rick had been with the Portland Public Schools for over 20 years and was loved by all that knew him. He was a part of the crew that set up all of our board meetings here today. So many of you knew him, and he will be very missed. The PPS Walk Run event that had to be rescheduled from the first week of school will take place this Thursday at 4 p.m. starting from across the Hannaford parking lot on the back cove. It will be followed by a happy hour and candidate meet and greet sponsored by PEA at the Portland House of Music. Ramat Ali, a junior at PHS, was recognized by the College Board as part of their National African American Recognition Program. We're very proud of Ramat and look forward to having her at a future meeting. I would also like to acknowledge our Director of Pre-Kindergarten Programs, Sue Chevalier. As some of you know, Sue is taking a break for the remainder of this year. Sue has been a tireless advocate for our students and families and the driving force behind our efforts to meet our long-term goals around expansion and reducing barriers to access. Thank you, Sue, and we look forward to welcoming you back next year. As I've been doing throughout the fall, I'd like to remind all of our families that we need you to complete the free and reduced school lunch application. We're pleased to no longer charge anyone for school breakfast or lunch, thanks to state and federal program waivers. However, there are potential benefits, such as the federal EBT payments to families that accrue from completing the applications, regardless of one's income level. So everyone has a reason to complete them. From a financial perspective, significant state and federal funding for Portland Public Schools is also tied to the percentage of students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. Significant decreases in that number will cost the district dearly in terms of access to state and federal funding opportunities. More immediately, the state's Educational Program and Services Formula, EPS, is calibrated to provide more money for districts based on the percentage of students with higher needs. Our share of state education funding will be reduced as a result of the reduction in students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. And you heard already about the groundbreaking and ribbon cuttings next month, so I'm going to skip that and move to our school reopening update. So I'd like to begin our school reopening update. As we've been doing for the past year, we provide a comprehensive update on our school reopening plans at the board meetings. Today's update, I'm glad to say, is lighter than what we've had throughout August and September. I'm happy to report, as you heard earlier, that as we are settling into the school year, the evidence to date suggests that our protocols are working. After a rough start, the changes that we put in place with seating charts and distancing protocols, combined with our existing mitigation measures, have helped to keep down the number of students who are identified as close contacts of positive cases and therefore required to quarantine. Last week, we saw an additional 9 cases with a total of 27 close contacts, with almost half of them associated with a single case. It is particularly noteworthy that at the end of last week, we only had 2 high school students in active quarantine. Our high vaccination rate, combined with the seating charts, distancing, and masking protocols, are helping to keep our students safe and learning. Participation in our pool testing program has continued to climb. We're close to 75% of all of our eligible K through 6 students participating, which exceeds our original expectations. With 2 weeks of pool testing behind us, we're finding that the prevalence of COVID in our schools continues to be lower than in the broader community. We're getting the hang of the logistics associated with pool testing. Concentrix, the DOE's vendor for the program, has finally secured the staffing that they had originally committed, which offers some relief to our amazing nursing team. As we had originally indicated, once we had a sense of the effectiveness of the testing and the requirements for making it work, we would look to scale up. And so now we are in the process of expanding pool testing to our in-school pre-kindergarten programs in the next couple of weeks. Once that's done, we will see if there's value added to expanding at the middle school beyond 6th grade, as currently we only do 6th grade. So the next step for us would be to look to expand to the 6th grade. These are necessary next steps, as we are still seeing a substantial number of students who are quarantined in the middle school and especially at the elementary level. At our last meeting, I talked about the additional testing capacity that we were in the process of negotiating. We're still moving forward with that conversation. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to be ready to go by the next board meeting. So that is additional testing capacity that would allow us to test asymptomatic students that we currently do not have the capacity to test, students who are out on quarantine and need to verify that they are COVID-free before they come back to school, and additional staff, so that, potentially could be one of the ways that we address the requirements of the new federal requirement that all staff be vaccinated or test on a weekly basis. So our priority this year, as you know, is on having students in person in school. And as you know, the single most important thing we can do is to reduce the number of students using remote learning support by keeping students safe and in school. But next, I want to update you on the support for students who are in need of remote learning because they are quarantining. At the last meeting, Assistant Superintendent Malia Nally updated you on the development of guideposts for remote support for students at all levels, both for full class or school closures and for individual students who need to quarantine. Subsequent to that presentation, our elementary staff asked us to reassess the requirements for individual students in quarantine because of the demands associated with keeping up with both remote and in-school service and planning. So in addition to adding an additional dedicated sub who will be responsible for serving as the remote learning liaison at the building, our curriculum department, led by curriculum director Jesse Robinson and technology integrator Courtney Graffius, organized 10-day plans for every elementary grade so that any elementary teacher can use them to provide support to their quarantine students. Our goal with our central capacity is to lift as much work off teachers' plates as possible and to provide a base of material and the added remote liaison to largely be responsible for coordinating services with families and teachers. I am grateful to our teachers for communicating their concerns and helping us to refine our plans as we strive to meet the needs of our students and family. Finally, as part of the return to school update, I want to update you on the challenges that we face in fully staffing our schools. As you heard during the comments, this continues to be an issue for us. Later today, we will be asking you to ratify the Memorandum of Understanding with the Portland Education Association on behalf of our teachers and educational technicians. One of the key components of that MOU is specifically in response to the lack of substitute teachers, which requires significant sacrifices from both of those units. In addition to substitutes, we continue to be challenged to fill other key positions in the district. We're down almost 20% of our transportation staff. We have almost a dozen openings in our food service and facilities department. These vacancies are requiring yeoman work on the part of the remaining staff, but that's adding to the stress that everyone is already feeling as it gets increasingly difficult to be able to meet the demands being placed on them. Combined with the supply chain challenges that we're facing, services are suffering, as you heard about transportation for our middle school and junior varsity athletics. You know, as you also heard, these challenges are not unique to the Portland Public Schools. Across the country, shortages in staff, supply chain challenges are causing similar problems from Oregon to Florida. And when I meet or listen to my colleagues in the region and across Maine, they're experiencing the same challenges. So I ask you and all members of the community to understand this and to extend compassion and grace to our staff. Remember that they're successfully keeping school open and safe for all of our students in the midst of these challenges. So that's the reopening update. So I don't know if you have any questions. I'm going to talk a little bit about our ESSERF funding. But before I do that, I know that we often have questions about that. So I wanted to just...
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. I do see a question from Ms. Bondo. Ms. Bondo, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent, for the update, for the reopening. And I'm so glad that the protocol is working. So when I heard mentioning teachers, I mean, teachers are working. I just want to recognize our teachers since the beginning, because if the protocol is working, I mean, the teacher are the one really in the front line to make sure that everything is coordinated. So when I heard you talking about teachers on the remote to try to coordinate the 10 days plan on the remote, I'm just wonder about the class management, because when I look at the picture, then a lot of teachers, they were not in the class setting for almost 1 year and a half. So coming back for a class, so I wonder if we getting any issue from teacher for any class management. So if everything's going okay, or if they need some help. This is one question. My second question is just how we are supporting the mental stage of our teachers, because they need support. As we try to do some social emotion for the student, I think the teachers need to be taken care. And if I remember from my notes, then last year during COVID, we had an online support for teachers. If they need some support, are we doing it for this year, or are we supporting our teacher around the mental stage?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Assistant Superintendent Nally to address the classroom management part, and then I'm going to. I don't know, Malia, if you can answer both of those questions. I'm not 100% sure that I know the answer to the second question either. So,
yeah, I can start, and then definitely feel free to chime in, or Assistant Superintendent Townsend as well. Good evening, everybody. So yes, so Ms. Bondo, you're asking if we are experiencing or if teachers are having classroom management challenges?
Yes.
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 Yes. That's something that's definitely come up and been a focus of conversations with our administrators and teachers. We recently had a meeting where we talked about, just trying to define what was happening, and then what people understand about the root causes, in order to understand if solutions we have planned are sufficient, or if there's other things we can do. So, what we're noticing in the elementary schools is that our pre-kinder and kindergarten students are noticeably struggling with just getting acclimated to school. Folks have theories that are not fully tested about why that might be the case in terms of their experience over the past year and a half. But definitely, there's a lot of effort and energy that teachers are putting into getting students to understand the routines and expectations of being in school. Some observations that our older elementary students are almost presenting behaviors more typical of what we'd see in middle school. And so some wonderings about, whether or not students were, a lot of different ideas about why that might be the case, but I guess I wouldn't say that because they're not tested theories at this point. So overall, classroom management is a challenge across grade levels, but especially at elementary, and we're hearing it at middle school as well. And then, like always, each individual school is in a different place with the extent to which this is consuming folks' time, attention, and energy. I think one of the causes we've talked about is the staffing challenges, which the superintendent spoke to. So we still are short on subs, on BHPs, on some of these positions that are typically helping out with students that have some of the bigger behavioral challenges. And, you know, it's a transition. We're still having to manage health and safety protocols. Teachers are still trying to get outside, but their classes are twice as big, if not bigger, because it's the full class and remote academies back 5 full days in person. So it's something we're talking a lot about and thinking about and trying to figure out how to organize supports for our schools. It was, you know, the focus of our cabinet meeting this morning. We have talked about different ideas in terms of BCBAs. These are people who are kind of expert in behavioral plans, trying to get a cadre of those folks into buildings to consult and roll up their sleeves and help teachers, PBIS coaches. We've reached out to some retired teachers who had real strengths in classroom management to see if they could come back and do some coaching and consulting. But we're also cognizant of the fact that finding additional people with these areas of expertise is hard, and we haven't even staffed up our own positions. And so we are also looking at how we're, you know, spending our time in terms of professional development and support when we pull our social workers together, our PBIS teams together, really trying to be intentional about understanding the specific needs and helping people share what is working, because there's lots of places where folks are doing great stuff and it's working really well. So, I mean, I guess what I would say is that that's a challenge. That's a definite pattern and a trend. We're aware of it. We're trying to be responsive. We're trying to activate resources and also pull on the expertise among our educators so that we can kind of support each other and learn from each other. But it's challenging. And I think it's part of why teachers are really exhausted, and why the start to school has been extremely, you know, it's been challenging for teachers to have to be, you know, trying to acclimate kids back to school and to manage through some of those challenging behaviors and to get kids back to the level of stamina they had before the pandemic.
Okay. Can I just stop, because I try to see that picture on the discipline, because when you look at the hardship on the classroom management, I mean, it can end up on the area of discipline. So I just wonder if we got any feedback from any assistant principal who in charge on the discipline, if they've been see since the beginning the increase of discipline sending to their room, because everything need to be readapt. I mean, everything need to building a new culture. Then the classroom management need to be handled. So I just want to get a picture. Did we see any increase on the discipline rate, or is still manageable right now?
So I know that we looked at the data this morning, as a matter of fact, and I don't know, Assistant Superintendent Townsend, if you want to say anything on this. I think that, you know, obviously last year we had no discipline, period, and, you know, because we had small classes and kids were in, you know, 2 days a week. I think that what we're seeing this year is, you know, a significant amount of discipline, but I think it's comparable to prior years in terms of like what's actually risen level of discipline. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. This is maybe not a wholly satisfactory answer. I mean, our systems around the data of tracking our discipline is one of kind of our core areas of continuing to grow our capacity. So we do have suspension data that we'll be able to track and compare year to year in terms of where we were. So that's stuff that we can bring back. We just began that initial review just because we've had enough time. I think, as the superintendent said, you know, there's typically, you know, kind of at this point in the year, we're starting to see behaviors emerge and that kind of thing, and certainly see seeing that in significant ways. I think coming out of last year, people's experience of that, is that it's, pretty intense, and people are stepping into this year feeling already weary. And so I think the combination of those factors have made for an intense kind of start to the year.
Okay. So I think we're going to get some updates around those data. So my last question is about the support for teachers. Are we building something? Do we have any structure to support teachers on any mental health, because it's overwhelming? So I just
in addition to the things that we've talked about tonight.
I didn't hear the second answer on my question.
Right. So, what we talked about is, for example, trying to remove the responsibility for planning for students who are in quarantine. And so, that was one of the things, the feedback that we got from our staff was that, what we had presented as the expectations placed a significant burden on them. And so we worked to remove those. Other than that, we have the same supports that we normally have in place for our teachers. Okay. I think the challenge is that, and we're going to talk about that when we ask you to approve the PA EdTech memorandum, is, we have no substitutes. So what happens when, somebody is out is that teachers lose their planning time, or they have to substitute, during their planning time, they'll go and substitute in a third grade class because we don't have a substitute for that class. So the staffing challenges are very, very real. And so the biggest support that we can provide to our teachers is actually be able to hire to fill all of the positions that we currently have empty. I don't remember what it is now, but Barb, we were at, I think, 15 ed techs, special ed techs that we still had not been able to fill. We're still at about, a dozen or more BHPs. You have that data?
Good evening, everybody. I don't actually have the BHP data, but we are down to 10 special ed techs that we need and 4 regular ed techs. So the numbers have come down a bit.
But that's still a significant, so the biggest support that we could provide is like actually having those positions filled, because there's little else that we can do, beyond what we're already trying to do. We've, Malia, do you remember how many of the BHPs? That's
18 as of 18 as of the end of last week. So it might be a little bit down, but I think about 18 that we're still looking for.
I believe what Ms. Bondo may be referencing was, I believe, a benefit we offered earlier in COVID, some online mental health services. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
And is that something we're still offering?
Exactly, because we try to go with any social emotion to try to relieve a lot of burnout to our students. So our teachers, for sure, they are human beings. So the way I see that, I remember last year, I think if I remember right, we are creating online support. If they have any personal burnout, they have a place to go. I just want to make sure if we have that structure in place for a teacher, or they can, speak to someone, get relieved, and then just get a support.
Yeah, so our benefits offer the employee assistance program, and that's regardless of whether you actually take our health benefits. It's available to every employee and their family as well. And we increased the number of visits from 3 to 5.
Okay.
So that is still available.
Okay, thank you. That's what I want to know. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bondo. Are there any other questions from the board about our COVID precautions or protocols? Mr. Rodriguez.
Just one clarification for after-school co-curricular activities. Do we have any guidance on mask wearing for those activities?
Assistant Superintendent Townsend, specialist.
So there are kind of sport specific things that the MPA has published that generally we should be providing. So, outdoors, has generally been our stance, not required this year for competition as it was like last spring. Certainly indoors for volleyball, we've been continuing to mask up. But, unless, as far as I understand, we're following, I haven't heard anything to the contrary, following all of the MPA recommendations for the sports.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Okay, I think we are good to move on with the rest of I'm sorry, Mr. Youssef.
One very quick question about the additional capacity testing. We're still negotiating. Do we know, are we expecting a time frame that we will be able to get the capacity?
Yeah, I checked in with them over the weekend. They said that they would get back to me on Monday. They did not get back to me on Monday. I haven't followed up with them, but I will, at some point in the near future.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. It's in their court. And so just.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. Mr. Superintendent, I think we're good to move on.
Okay. So tonight I'd like to update you on the status of our, I'm sorry, okay. I want to update you on the status of our elementary and secondary school emergency relief funding, ESSERF. These are the funds from the last round of American Recovery Act funding that's targeted to schools. And as you may recall, the Portland Public Schools were allocated approximately $18 million. Those funds are good for 2 years. So that's through the end of the 23-24 school year at this point. They're intended to support a return to in-person instruction and support for student recovery in light of 2 years of interrupted learning. A minimum of 20% of the funds must be reserved for that purpose. The regulations around this funding also call for the engagement of the community in deciding how to use these funds. As you'll recall, we have said from day one that we would envision a participatory budgeting process to determine how those funds are used. During our district budget process last spring, we talked about how we would divide the funding. The most immediate need was to provide the necessary supports so that we would be able to reopen schools this fall. To date, we estimate that we will use approximately $7 million for that purpose. Those funds are supporting everything from our additional staffing, positions that you've heard about before, the positions that you heard about today, the third dedicated sub, things along those lines, as well as our increased specialists for things such as art, music, and PE, garden ed techs, nursing, and other efforts to reduce class size at the secondary level, as well as for additional supports for departments dealing with added expectations such as our human resources department, our finance department, and so on. Those funds are also being used to support our efforts to create outdoor learning spaces, keep our schools and classrooms safe, PPE for students and staff, and otherwise make in-person learning possible. We also committed to setting aside enough funds to meet the 20% requirement for the extended learning opportunities with things such as summer school. We used previous rounds of relief funding, so some of the previous federal funding that we'd received to support last year's summer school programming to the tune of about $2.5 million. And we've set that same amount aside for each of the next 2 years, so a total of $5 million. So that leaves us with just around $6 million for a more strategic, forward-looking set of actions that are consistent with our commitment to increasing staff, student, and community engagement and planning for the use of these funds. I've discussed this with Chair Figder, and we will be scheduling a workshop for the board to discuss a timeline and process for using those funds. The Maine DOE has required us to submit our application for these funds, and we did that last week. That application is in your packet tonight. It's also posted online and is consistent with those 3 elements that I just outlined. I look forward to working with you and our community to plan for the effective use of these funds. We're very fortunate to have been the recipients of these resources and look forward to using them to make a difference in the lives of our students and families. And that concludes my report.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Are there any questions on this last part of the presentation about ESSERF funds? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to the report of the Secretary. Consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of September 19th, 2021. Is there a motion? Ms. Bondo, seconded by Mr. Youssef. Are there any questions about the motion? So this is specifically from our executive session. Seeing none, is there any public comment? So specifically, this is for public comment on our meeting minutes from September 19th, 2021. All right, seeing none, we're going to close public comment. Is there any discussion on our meeting minutes? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you are in support of approving the meeting minutes of September 19th, 2021. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair, Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, so the
And I
meeting,
skipped the students because they were not a part of the executive
Yes.
session. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. The minutes from our September 19th meeting are unanimously approved. Next, we have consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of September 21st, 2021. Is there a motion? Mr. Burke, seconded by Ms. Russell Better. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'm going to move to public comment. Is there any public comment on our meeting minutes from our business meeting on September 21st, 2021? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Is there any board discussion on our meeting minutes? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you're in support of approving the meeting minutes of September 21st, 2021. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair, Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Ms. Chung,
Yes.
Ms. Yangala,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, so our meeting minutes are unanimously approved. Next, we are moving on to our board focus. And tonight we're going to hear from the Food Fuels Learning Network. Mr. Superintendent, would you like to introduce this session?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much.
There we go. Tonight's board focus on educational issues is our annual update from Food Fuels Learning. Try saying that 3 times very fast. This collaboration between the district and the Greater Portland Food Security Council is now in its 4th year and has created a climate of collaboration and community engagement to improve access to food and improve nutrition in our community. Tonight, Jim Hanna will lead the presentation with the Food Fuels Learning team leaders. Thank you in advance, Jim, as always, for your leadership and commitment to partnering with the district.
Well, thank you, Superintendent Patano. We're honored to be here to present the work and the collaboration that so powerful with Portland Public Schools and the community that we've been very fortunate to bring together. Last time we reported to you was in August of 2019. A lot has happened since then. Obviously, as I sat and listened to the reports in this meeting, there's a lot of different issues that the school system, the staff, the community is dealing with, obviously with COVID and with the twin pandemic that we're recognizing with institutional racism. So we're here in that context to talk about food fuels learning. Fun phrase to say. And we're going to give you a little background. I'll start reminding some of the folks. I know some of the school committee members were not on the school board when we presented in the past. So we'll give you a little context of how we started, where we've been. Lily Schiller from Cultivating Community will then present on the bulk of our work, which is the action groups. And then Christina Colello, also from the Cumberland County Food Security Council, and our Farm to School Project Director will present on some of the other capacity building work. And we'll finish with some opportunities for investment in health equity, which is clearly on the agenda of our community and schools these days. So again, Lily and Christina will be following me. We also have a very strong leadership team of folks that are from different parts of the school system and the community. Jay McLucas from Food Service has been a strong ally. And again, we can't thank you enough, Superintendent Patano, for all the attention and investments you've helped us make and the support you've provided in addition to the school committee and school board members from the past. So thank you for that. Essentially, our values are that all the students in Portland Public Schools have right to nutritious, culturally appropriate food that allows them to attain their full potential. That's our guiding value. We have a number of goals in this process, which includes building food security throughout, recognizing the need for families for food access. We engage the community, so it's a community-led process. We learn what the community needs and act on that. And we prioritize sustainable systems change. I emphasize that piece because what we've recognized from the beginning is that when we work with schools, we can't ask school staff, we can't ask folks to do more than they're already doing. So we bring additional capacity. We make suggestions about efficiencies, but certainly my partner has been in the Portland Public School system for 30 years, and I recognize how hard everyone in Portland Public Schools work. And again, we make it a priority not to expect more. What we can do is help bring resources and help add value to efforts that are already being made. So our mission is to build food security in schools through comprehensive research and community-based action. And that's how we began in our first year. We began in 2017. We convened at Portland City Hall. We had a parent from the schools who said, I've talked to Superintendent Patano and he's ready to address food insecurity in Portland schools. So we have to give a shout out to Heather McIntosh, that parent, who was a leader in initiating this project. We spent that first year doing that research, engaging the community, talking to about 200 members of the Portland Public Schools community and allies in the community, and created the assessment. I believe Board Member Rodriguez brought you our summary assessment, which includes many of the recommendations that came out of that initial report that we did. We continue to follow up on those and evolve those from when we issued that report and the first time we came to you in August of 2018. So with that report, we initiated our action groups. And to me, this is the real genius of this initiative, is the 5 action groups that address all the different elements of the school food system. You'll hear from Lily about how the synergy between those action groups and how they work together, how they have focus in different areas, and how they achieve the goals that are shared with the community that we've vetted with them. Other highlights over the years include being awarded a $100,000 USDA Farm School Implementation Grant. That was in July of 2020, just after the pandemic started, which made it a little tricky to do some of the work we wanted to do, like cafeteria in the classroom and things like that. But we're coming back around to achieving some of those goals, and we expect to, with a little bit of modification, do the work that we proposed originally before COVID hit. And again, it was good to hear the report of the ESSERF funding from you, Superintendent Patano, and the investments that have included being made into the different food system work in the school system. I do want to also note the request that you made of families to make sure they return the free and reduced price eligibility meal forms, because that has a huge impact, not just on the number of students that get served meals in schools, but on many other funding streams for the school. So here we are in October 21, continuing to do the work. And is this where I transition to Lily? Yes, Lily is going to pick it up here with goals and objectives and talking about the various action groups. So thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you. So I know many of you have heard about the overarching umbrella of our work before, but there are also many new people on the school board and at this presentation that we're so happy to be presenting in front of you. So I just want to explain that these five action groups is how we organize the network and the work that we do. And to us, they encompass, as Jim said, the full school food system. Our formal goals are elaborated on the executive summaries we handed out. So I'm just going to explain these very simply. Charitable foods is all food given to students and families outside of federal funded meals. So this is things such as school food pantries, take-home produce and staples, and donated snacks to the classroom. Federal nutrition programs are school meals, such as breakfast and lunch, and more than that. School gardens are outdoor classrooms and accompanying programs where students learn how to grow food, try fruits and vegetables, and can share the produce they grow with their community. Nutrition education programs include any program or curricula that teaches students about healthy eating. And sustainable practices is focused on everything that ties the food system together by addressing waste management practices at the end of the food system, and also encouraging supporting our local economy through local procurement and choices around packaging and utensils. So each action group is focused on the area I just explained. However, our primary goal that spans all the action groups is to create communication and relationship between those who are involved in this food security work, because we believe that network collaboration makes all our work more effective, and it helps us identify and fill gaps and leverage resources and policy together. So I'm going to give you a high-level highlight of what's been going on in each action group and also who's involved. But as was stated, we've been doing this work for almost 4 years now. So there is a lot of history recorded about the different projects and accomplishments that can all be found on the website. So Charitable Foods Action Group is primarily convened by Catherine Sargent from the Locker Project. This group is facilitation and collaboration between programs who directly support students and families experiencing food insecurity. Beyond, and you can see the many different both school staff and also community partners who are involved in these monthly meetings and just on the network list and previous collaborations. So beyond just getting food to people, there's a real focus on the food being fresh, local, and culturally relevant to the families who are receiving it. We all know that the pandemic has greatly exacerbated food insecurity, and this action group played a big role in supporting Portland families. The Locker Project distributed 100,000 pounds of produce and staples for Portland families through take-home bags. This group also helps support the Portland Public Schools social workers who organized with Wayside to distribute another 250 boxes a week to students and families at their home. This network is a place that helped coordinate a broad array of many different food distribution partners to map the efforts and find gaps during the spring and summer of 2020. And I also want to note that the Locker Project, who's the main food security partner for Portland Public Schools, just created a new staff position specifically dedicated to this school district and plans to partner with all schools this year.
Lily, could I ask you a question?
Sure.
Could you explain why we see such disparities in this chart among the different schools?
That's a really great question. I am speaking on behalf of all the action groups right now, whereas my expertise lies more in the school garden. So I don't know if Ailish Denigan is on the Zoom right now and wants to try to answer that, or if Jim, who also helps support Catherine, is able to answer that.
Yeah, I think some of it has to do with many of the highest distribution spots are elementary schools in high need areas. I know Catherine tried to coordinate with the meal distributions when they were happening. So when families, it often is a function of the number of families showing up and taking the food. So we tried to be aware there were going to be a lot of families picking up lunches, for example. So there was a synergy between food service last year and when the meals were being distributed and when the Locker Project would show up to distribute their fresh produce.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to have Catherine answer that question more in depth too, but I think that some of the challenges and disparities can also be addressed now that they've created a new position that's specifically focused on this school district, because they do work with a few other school districts as well.
Great, thank you so much.
So the next action group being federal nutrition. This group is really focused on supporting Central Kitchen to provide free and nutritious meals year round. And doing this in conjunction with changing waivers, regulations, and safety protocols throughout the pandemic. The food service director, Jane McLucas, is an amazing collaborator to the partners who are listed here. Supported by this network, as well as the more recent farm to school partners who came through that grant. So the main focus of this group is always raising participation and making meals accessible year round. A big thing that happened during the pandemic was meals becoming universally free, and continuing to advocate for universal free meals was an important focus, which did become successful recently statewide. The branding work, which you can see some examples of here, is also a project that was completed recently with the goal to help Central Kitchen be more recognizable, have a consistent image, and communicate the valuable work that they put into feeding students. We also always want to be lifting up the really amazing work that is being done with scratch cooking and local procurement to help change perception of school meals, and also inform the public of how to get school meals, what's going on, filling out the paperwork, all of the really important information that keeps things running. Another thing that was handed out to all of you is Food Service 101, which I encourage you to look at, as this is a document that Jane collaborated with us on and has updated over the years to help communicate how federal nutrition services work in Portland Public Schools, and also all the regulations and rules that dictate how and why meals are served the way that they're served. And so this document can really help the community have a foundational basis for understanding this very complex program, to then be able to better collaborate and support positive changes with food services while having that basic understanding. Cafeteria Classroom is a remote platform for students and families to both learn more about school meals, trying to make it more accessible of like what's going on with summer meals, where can they find them, but also uplifting all the amazing new recipes and local procurement that's going on. Because I just want to say that through all of this and all of the incredibly hard work that Jane and her team does, they've continued to participate in the Harvest of the Month program, sourced locally, and they even did our annual fall school potato harvest this fall. So yeah, real superheroes over there, especially being so understaffed and having so much on their plates. So our third action group is School Gardens, which is convened by myself at Cultivating Community and Anna Francischetti, who's the Talbot Garden Ed Tech. This action group engages teachers and parents from almost all of our schools, and we support people who are involved in their school gardens as well as community partners. Our main goal has been to assist every school to develop and maintain a school garden program. This action group has worked for years to build a fundable model to integrate and gain consistency for school garden programs throughout the district. And we believe a garden and food program can be a solution to incorporate the goals of this network and the district in a more sustainable way than asking more of existing classroom teachers. And the pandemic has created an amazing opportunity to allow us to pilot a garden and food class as an elementary school special, which is currently happening at 3 elementary schools, with 3 still aiming to hire an educator for this year. And so this graphic is another thing that's in your handout. And there's also a video on the resource sheet if you want to check out and see kind of school, garden, and food learning in action. The Nutrition Education Action Group convenes mostly community partners who offer classes and enrichment throughout the schools. And it's primarily convened by Amanda Hutchins from City of Portland Health Division. This group has done a lot to coordinate all of these many partners to reduce overlap and help make sure that the most students are getting nutrition education in the schools as possible. And most recently, they've been working to provide cooking carts to schools to give teachers resources to more easily be able to teach cooking and nutrition lessons. And this will be a great resource for food and garden educators also who already have that built into their teaching schedules. This group has also worked to support remote learning and create more adaptations of learning materials for students and families. And lastly is the Sustainable Practices Action Group, which is also primarily community partners and is convened by Vanessa from Eco Maine. Their recent focus has been on waste sorting, and this best practices guide is on a resource sheet that we handed to you and can help schools implement composting, recycling, and trash systems. And there's some other images here of educational materials they've put together, including an in-depth composting pilot that they're doing at Talbot Elementary School right now. So this is a very full but brief overview of the current action group work, which brings our whole community together to work on the full school food system and bolster food security for all of our students. And I'll pass it over to Christina.
Thanks, Lily. Good evening, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you. So in addition to the action groups, we wanted to highlight some of the other ways that the network has been building capacity within the school community. So I'll talk a bit more about these in the upcoming slides, but here I wanted to highlight the Full Plates, Full Potential summer food grants. So this last summer, Portland distributed meals at 10 additional sites, and this grant allowed us to communicate these changes to every family in Portland with a summer meals map, as well as offer to-go enrichment activities for participants at each site. And then regarding the garden and food sciences program, the ESSERF funds have helped to build capacity by employing full-time educators who provide students connections to food systems, locally grown foods, cooking and nutrition lessons. And it supports other district goals such as social emotional learning and outdoor education. You can go to the next slide, please. So the Foundation for Portland Public Schools Food Fund gives community members the opportunity to invest in projects that build food security for Portland students and families. And the Food Fields Learning Leadership Team helps to grant this funding to different projects. So for example, this photo is from one of the first projects that we funded, which was Stocking the King Food Pantry. To date, we've been able to grant out nearly $34,000, and we wanted to give a special shout out and thank you to the Foundation's Executive Director, Andy Summers, who's just been incredibly supportive of this work and has really done a remarkable job fundraising and promoting the Food Fund to ensure that it's a really robust resource for the community. So in partnership with the Foundation, we quickly mobilized to provide emergency grants to those working to meet urgent food needs related to the pandemic. So to date, that's made up about $20,000 of what's been granted from the fund. The photo here is one of the emergency grantees, Khadija Ahmed, who runs the Food for All mobile market, which is a mobile grocery store that specializes in African food items. The grants we provided to the mobile market allowed free meals for unhoused students and families. So it's been really amazing to have a resource like the Food Fund to support urgent needs as well as ongoing work like this in the school community. And in July of 2020, as Jim had kind of mentioned, the Cumberland County Food Security Council, in partnership with Portland Public Schools, was awarded a USDA Farm to School implementation grant for the proposal Local Food Fuels Learning. So the main objective of this grant and this proposal is to promote school food with an emphasis on local, fresh, and nutritious by building upon the work of Food Fuels Learning. So we have kind of three main goals that we're working around. So the first is around increasing local food procurement. The second is branding and marketing for food service. So as we kind of mentioned, Food Service 101 and the new logo are some examples of that work. And then the third is around increasing opportunities for experiential food and agricultural education for students. And please do visit our website and social media to learn more about what that looks like on the ground, because it's quite comprehensive and it's very collaborative in spirit, like all of our broader network activities. And we were also really delighted last year. We had 4 high school interns work with the network. So each completed a 40-hour paid internship, and they focused on developing and distributing a survey about school meals to students and parents. And we were completely amazed. They got over 800 responses. They analyzed all of that data and presented it to the leadership team and to food services. And we've been incorporating their findings into our Farm to School grant activities for this year. And we're really fortunate to have Anna and Leoticia continuing on to do another internship with us this school year. And we also wanted to take a moment to highlight how the network has been a space to cultivate leaders really passionate about school food and about farm to school. So that includes folks such as Anna Franceschetti, who is an AmeriCorps Vista with the council and is now a garden ed tech at Talbot. Jessica Puzak, who is a food corps service member and then went on to be a cafeteria team lead for Row and is now a garden ed tech there. Rachel Solomon was a food corps member who is now a garden teacher with Falmouth Public Schools. Lauren Hickey was an AmeriCorps Vista with the council, who is now the Westbrook Schools coordinator with the Locker Project. And Ailish Dunnigan, who is a food corps service member, went on to be a cafeteria team lead at East End and is now the Portland Schools coordinator with the Locker Project. So as we're moving into our 4th year of this network, it's just been really moving to see the progress that's been possible through this collective effort and all the ways it's continuing to grow and enrich our school community. So I just wanted to thank you all for what you do as school board members, and thank you for supporting our work and allowing us to share with you this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Jim to wrap us up for the evening.
As you heard, there's a lot of important work going on in our collaboration, and I think there has been recent discussions around Portland Public Schools and health equity and other forms of equity, and so we thought this might be an opportunity to think about additional investments as it relates to food and food insecurity and equitable food access for Portland Public School students, because we think it's really critical. I mean, the bottom line, why this project started and why we do it, is there are a lot of families that don't have enough access to healthful food in their homes. Sometimes families, the most nutrition of the day for the young people comes through the schools, which is a credit to Portland Public Schools food service, and also indicates that there's much more we need to do as a community to support these families. So again, here's some opportunities for the school board, the school budget, and even the community to invest in food security for Portland Public Schools families and the larger community as well. And I think there is a ripple effect beyond these investments in just the students that really have an impact on the whole city and even beyond. I think the example that we've set with Food Fuels Learning has been picked up. Some of our ideas and programs have been implemented in other school districts as well. But certainly the Food Fund is a huge resource that we continue to promote and suggest folks invest in if they want to support this work, both the public and foundations. I think one of the things that's become clear, we heard this from Superintendent Patana today, is staffing is an issue throughout the district, but I think it's really critical at a critical juncture at Central Kitchen and throughout the food service. So would promote, if anyone's looking for a job, there's really great opportunities to work, but also to make sure that you invest in staffing, make sure that the jobs pay well enough so they're competitive. In the infrastructure, there's a lot of opportunity to invest in infrastructure that will support more processing and purchasing of local food. I think the school district with the ESSERF funding has made investments in garden and food science educators, and there's more opportunity to build the sustainability of that program. So we're certainly looking for more support for that. The Farm to School grant, we were able to secure bolsters cafeterias of class and culture. And again, I think there's a lot of things within the cafeteria environment, improving working conditions, maybe longer lunch periods for students, number of lunch aids to provide additional support to students in the cafeteria. So it becomes not just a place for kids to eat their lunch really fast, but to learn about food and to learn about where their food comes from and to talk about food. And so we're looking for ways to invest in that environment. And then in general, other investments in health equity. I mean, part of what this program started, what our vision was to have a stronger wellness team within the Portland Public Schools. And a lot of that work has been kind of put on hold because of the pandemic, but certainly there's still additional opportunities to invest more in wellness in the school district. And also a lot of us are paid to do this work, but there are a lot of folks that have been involved that we haven't had funding to support, or people work outside of their regular work hours to participate. So we're both looking at foundation funds to help support that. We'd like to hear more from parents in the school district. We'd like to be able to support more student involvement, more internships. So all those are ways we can invest in the capacity to build food fields learning. I don't know if Lily or Christina want to add to that, but just wanted to say those are the opportunities we've identified currently. And I think what's really important to recognize in this moment is that there are a lot of resources out there to test some things. We've learned a lot during the pandemic in terms of the impact of structural racism and inequitable outcomes as it relates to students that are poor or from families of color. And we've also learned that investing in those families, whether it's a child tax credit, whether it's increase in SNAP benefits, has a huge impact. And so those investments are being made at the federal level. And I advocate we continue to test those opportunities with the funding we have to really push on solutions that we know work when we have the funding to do it. Test our theory of change, prove it, and then continue to make those investments. So again, I think we're in a really exciting and experimental time, but at the same time, it's also a really critical time. And there's a lot of kids that have suffered, so we want to make sure we're able to invest in those families so kids don't lose ground in their education. At this point, I think if there are any questions from the board, we're happy to entertain those.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Are there questions from the board? I see Ms. Chung with her hand up. Go ahead, please, Ms. Chung.
Thank you for the presentation. Despite the many years I've been a student in PPS, I have not thought much about all the work and consideration put into the food that we're served, except I do remember the exact day in 5th grade when weekly ice cream servings were substituted for a salad bar. Yes, I don't know if you're in charge of that, but I do remember that. Anyways, thank you for the presentation and all the work you do. Now I just have some brief questions about the request for support. I might have missed it in the presentation, so if you could just clarify, that would be great. For the integration of nutrition, food, and sustainability in education, what does the Food Fuels learning team see for how that can be improved? What grades do you see that being more prevalent in?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, we've done a lot of work around waste management, so composting, so food waste, and also making sure that food doesn't get thrown away. So, and it's gotten a little tricky with share tables with COVID, but that was one of the things that we were implementing more of. So, I mean, when we talk about sustainability, one of the things, the obvious places we see an opportunity is to waste less food, or to make sure that food that isn't going to be eaten, that can't be eaten, gets processed back into the soil and is also taken out of the waste stream, so the school system doesn't have to pay for it to be hauled away so those are a couple ideas that we've been working on in terms of sustainability practices.
Mm-hmm. I would also add thank you for that feedback and question. And I think that the garden and food educators that we're piloting last year and this year at the elementary schools is a really robust way to hire someone with the expertise and time to incorporate a lot of these goals into a class for elementary school students. That being said, there's really awesome work happening at the middle and high schools as well with teachers who are already there. So I think there's a wide array of possibilities, but I think that that's a main strategy that we've all been supporting and testing out recently.
Thank you.
Other questions from the board? Ms. Bondo.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I really like the district initiatives and you just, share here. So this is something that I think the district can use it and in the classroom setting. So I have three small questions. The food insecurity. So we know the food insecurity is really what we want to try to reduce among our families and especially our students. But I try to understand the wastes of the food, the sides. So my first question is, are you were able to evaluate on the scale how much our students have waste, the food wasted, versus the one they've been consumed? This is one, to try to understand, because we want to have we want to have all the family access food and the student to have food on their lunchtime, but we need to make sure they're consuming those foods. So I try to understand if you were able to value it on the scale to see if we wasting more or we really consuming what we've been offered to the student. And then on my sub question, then if we have some specific food and you have noticed, is the been the most wasted than consumed?
Yeah.
Can I go one-on-one, or you want me to get all my questions at once?
I can try to answer that first one briefly. So I think the short answer is that no, we have not done a district-wide food waste audit. I think that is a really interesting request that could be put to our sustainable action group. And I think with the right support around funding and also access to the cafeterias and like the needed, the access to the schools, I think that could potentially be something to organize around. But I would say that there is a lot of best practices out there as far as food waste. And I think, of course, students liking the food is important. Students being educated about what they're being served, if it's something they don't recognize, or if it's packaged in a way, or, there's not enough signage. Students might be hesitant to try something. So one of our strategies is having food corps members, actually you can see in this picture that's up there right now, is taste tests. So actually really using the cafeteria as a classroom and running events where students have adults in the room to give them opportunities to try small amounts of food that is typical in a school meal and get their feedback. And we also give that feedback to Central Kitchen around the recipes. So doing more things like that is really helpful. Amount of time that students have to eat is huge. I think looking at Food Service 101 is also helpful because there's a lot of regulations around how much food needs to be served to every kid. And some kids might not have enough time to eat it, or they might not, if you're a kindergartner, maybe you're not going to eat as much as a fifth grader and there's going to be more food wasted. So I'm giving a lot of different responses, but there's a lot of different strategies that we could use around that.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. So my second question is, during the pandemic last year, we have kids at home. I mean, especially high school, they've been at home. So I think we've been deliver food at home. And I see that you've been using some of the youth internship to build some survey around the need of different food. So you were able also to have those surveys, because I want to understand if we getting some data about the delivery, the food that we deliver at home during pandemic, if those food have been used. So because it's really a key specific measure to try to measure the success of those delivered at home, because we can deliver at home, but it's been waste. So we were able to survey, because this is a good question under that survey, then the youth can use on an internship to make sure that when we deliver, because we use the volunteers, there's a lot of administration around that. So just make sure that it has a value behind it.
So the survey that the high school interns did this past school year was about when hot meals were still being served. But I absolutely agree that getting feedback around the meals and the food that was being delivered to students during the pandemic is really important. And that's certainly something that we could suggest to our interns this year if they would want to take that on for their next survey topic.
All right. Okay. So my last question is on the high school, because they have an open campus for their meal. And if I remember, the seniors, they can go eat outside on their lunchtime, so they have that freedom to go. Maybe during the pandemic, we don't have any recall because they've been on remote. So maybe to think about this year, the way they're in person, to try to see how much are using the open campus, the opportunity in the cafeteria compared to the one prefer to go eat outside.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot. I know Jane struggles with that competition. It's hard to beat the local restaurants who are serving. My vision is someday having enough funding to actually put a food truck behind the schools run by students where they're actually making the food compete with those local restaurants. But I think that's probably a couple grants away from what we can realistically do. But in the meantime, I think, it is important to, promote the meals and figure out what the students will like, because there are students that don't have the money to go to those local restaurants. So, and, there's also at that age, there's a lot of stigma related to whether you can leave campus and go get food, or, people stretch themselves beyond actually what they can afford when they actually have free meals available. So we want to part of our survey was trying to figure out how do we make those meals a little cooler in terms of like what kids will like or what they think is, something that is, not just the food itself, but the environment. What can we do to take some of that stigma away from the cafeteria, especially when we have the opportunity to feed those students nutritious food, much more nutritious food than the food they'll find in the high school neighborhood downtown. At least most of the choices they make. So it's a challenge, and we definitely have it on our mind. And that's part of what we're trying to figure out with the work of the student interns in terms of the student food preferences at that level.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you for what you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. Jim, hello. I'm going to just jump right into that last comment that you made, and then I'll get into what I was planning to say. One effective way to promote healthy, nutritious habits is what we're doing at the elementary schools, the gardening and nutrition education program and the curriculum that we've built. So I think that that's part of what we're trying to do, teach from an early age the value of nutritional education, and of course, what we're doing with the gardens. So I guess I wanted to first of all say this has been the Food Fuels Learning report, and the groups has been some of the work that I've been most proud to support over the last several years. And as the board members know, the school garden group is the one that I've been most closely associated with. So I want to just cue up to the board that a lot of the work that we've been doing to prepare the curriculum and to kind of hand off the work to the schools is because these folks are not going to be around forever. So a lot of the foundational work that's been done, the board really needs to embrace and try to figure out ways to keep it here for the foreseeable future. And that could potentially be by ways of investments in our budget and allocating resources, because these community partners are here to set things off and get us started. Then we need to, through advocacy and through awareness, demonstrate the value that these programs have. So I just wanted to cue that up for the board to know. And then we heard earlier from Ms. Chung's question, about how do we tie that up? And then we heard from Lily about the middle school and high school programs and how that's something new and energetic that we're learning about that we want to explore. So again, just wanted to cue that up. I think that it's really important for us to understand the moment in time that we're in the pandemic. And we saw food supplies disruptions last year that literally had our supermarkets shelves empty. It was a scary moment. We here in Maine, we have an opportunity to rely on our local farms and our agricultural industry to support our local produce producers and our local farmers. And I think that this is one small way that we do that, by partnering and exploring these programs like Food Fuse Learning. The last thing that I wanted to say is just ask a question to Lily, specifically about the schools that we have put some of the, or rather the school garden network work that we've done, and just what she envisions to be the handoff, how she envisions the handoff over to the schools so that we can continue that for the foreseeable future without them, having that eternal commitment.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that it's a complex answer and that it's one that I am very grateful to be in conversation with many district staff members about. And I think it's an ongoing conversation. I know that the budget is incredibly challenging and that creating new positions is a big ask. I think that what we've been able to pilot from CARES funding and ESSERF funding is an incredible opportunity, and that schools have shown a lot of interest in having that opportunity. The fact that six of the elementary schools asked for that this year, I think speaks a lot to that. I do also just want to raise awareness that in Biden's Build Better Back Better plan, say that one 3 times fast, there actually is funding allocated for food and garden education in that as well. And these are some of the kind of advocacy points that Food Corps has been working on nationwide that has, really influenced our community here in Portland, since Cultivating Community has hosted Food Corps members for almost 10 years now. So I think that my answer, Roberto, is that I would love to see this specials model stick in the elementary schools, but I also understand that other creative solutions sometimes need to happen. And I think that our continued work with Brooke and Fiona on the district curriculum level and just working with principals and assistant superintendents to figure out what is most sustainable for schools is something that we're committed to doing.
Thank you, Lily. I'm really excited for us to just continue to envision a long-term plan for the nutrition and garden programs in our schools. So again, just want to cue it for the board of what that means and the value behind that. I guess the last thing I'll say, just as a comment to close, food security is something that I've later in life I've really learned to appreciate. I learned how to garden as an adult, and today I have a business whose literally our philosophy is to help families and organizations take steps towards self-sufficiency by improving access to health, local, fresh food. And then recently, I started working as an interim co-director for Cultivating Community, whose mission is food justice for all. So this is near and dear to me. This is an issue that I care deeply about, It's probably not what most people talk about as the role and functions of the school board, but I certainly would like this to be a big part of my quote unquote footprint or whatever I leave behind in my work. I want this to be a big part of the impact that I've had in this district. So again, I would just ask the board to continue their advocacy behind this work and support all, not just the gardens, but all of the recommendations that the original Food Fuels Learning Report came from, and to familiarize yourselves with the reality of the food insecurity issues that we're dealing with, not just in the district and not just in the state, but as a country. These are real issues, and as we've said many, many times, if our children are not eating healthy, they're not coming to school prepared to learn. That means that their families are not probably here advocating for them either. So these are people that are silently suffering, and they need us who have platforms and live microphones in front of us to speak loudly and take bold action to make sure that we recognize their struggles and put resources in place to meet their needs. I just wanted to close with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rodriguez. We are lucky to have your expertise on the board and appreciate your work on this issue. Mr. Burke.
Yeah, thank you. I think I don't have questions, but I wanted to provide a few shout outs, and I'll try to be non-repetitive and brief. First of all, I just want to amplify what's been said about the amount of resources that's coordinated through your work and that's been brought forward to us here tonight. It's, what's being coordinated in terms of people, partners, money, and food. So just thank you for all doing that and extending and complementing the work that we're doing inside the district. And shout out to the staff that are within the schools that are attending the meetings, but benefiting from you setting up the meetings and getting the table set, so to speak. I've seen the garden educators in action. I have a student at Talbot and at Rowe, and I think that's excellent. I would love to see those continue and look forward to being part of that solution. I want to shout out the vegan meals and Jane for taking the risk to bring those forward, hot vegan meals daily. It's something that benefits my families and many others, and I think it's perhaps an under touted innovation that's happened in the past few years. Westbrook is rightfully getting some attention for what they're doing in terms of culturally relevant menu items. And I think Jane's really tried to do that through the vegan menu. I think it's not necessarily packaged as such as what we've seen in Westbrook, but I know it's the intentions there. So I just want to say thank you to this effort being a platform for where that feedback was brought into Portland Public Schools, and to Jane and food service staff for hearing the feedback and really going the distance to do all they could with sourcing and menu planning for that. And then in terms of the farm to school grant that you mentioned, the branding and communications work, which I think was goal B, I just see some materials that in front of me that are a result of that. And I see, providing all Portland Public School students with nutritious, nourishing meals, thoughtfully sourced and made with love. I think that really nails what I've learned from working closely with the department over the last few years to understand the the amount of hoops they have to jump through, the amount of limited resources they have to navigate, and how they do put together what our kids eat every day, the 6,500 students and meals, is profound. And I know it is done with love, even though we might cover that sometimes with other things because we don't want to be perhaps that emotive about it, but I know it's done that way. And then I just want to shout out these little bookmarks that my kid brought home the other day that noted, that the tomatoes came from Liberation Farms, and it was part of the school lunch. It was a conversation piece with my kid. I knew it was something that was happening in our district, but I don't think a lot of parents and families knew. And it was just great to see that touch point to try to communicate how awesome our meals are in our schools. And we're doing a lot already, and I look forward to doing more. So thank you all for what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Adam. Could I respond to one thing you said? Of course. I just want to highlight that, yes, thank you for mentioning the culturally relevant food work that's happening in Westbrook. And I do just want to highlight that kind of our networks and impact go also beyond Portland, and that Chef Sam Gasparo, who's running that, is on our farm to school team. Through our food fund grant, that's how we know Khadija, who is partnering with her to develop those meals because of the connection we were able to make, and being very respectful of everything that is on Jane and Central Kitchen's plate. We're taking it one step at a time, but we do hope to be able to share the benefits of what's happening in Westbrook and taste test some of those items later this year. And I want to give a big shout out to my food corps members, Marcia Thomas, who's a Deering alum, who helped make those bookmarks and do the taste test with help of Christina. So yeah, thank you for all of those acknowledgements.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions or comments from the board. I do want to just acknowledge the intense collaboration from so many different organizations. I think that is fairly unique and so beneficial in bringing your expertise and passion and resources to the table to work with the district. It's really an awesome network and effort, and I just really applaud it. I had one question. I have one other comment. It's just particularly refreshing and great to see the community leadership development, the fact that food corps members are then going on to serve in roles in the district and in neighboring districts, and just want to salute that leadership development that you're doing as well. I noticed that in the Farm to School grant that one of the goals was to increase the procurement of local food by 5% over, I believe, the next year. And I'm wondering what that would bring us to in terms of the percent of our food that's percent of our food that is local. I don't know, Christine, if you're still around and if you know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I believe that would bring us close to about 25% if we were able to do a 5% increase.
Excellent. That's really encouraging to see. Thank you all. Thank you for this presentation. I don't know if the superintendent has any closing words. He's shaking his head no. So just want to thank you, Christine, Lily, and Jim for your presentation tonight. Thank you so much to all of your work and to all of the partners whose work you discussed tonight. It really is a fantastic effort. So with that, we are going to move on to consent items. And tonight, we're going to start with acknowledgement of donations made to the school. And I believe tonight we're also going to include a quarterly update from the Foundation for Portland Public Schools. So Mr. Superintendent, will you please speak to this item?
Yes, Madam Chair. Under Board Policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district as required by that policy. All the donations are listed in the board agenda under this item. Our practice is for each donor to receive a written contribution acknowledgement expressing our heartfelt gratitude as well as for their tax purposes. I would like to thank the generous contributors to the Portland Public Schools who have made donations of durable goods, goods of substantial value, and historical or commemorative significance, including $5,000 from David Lyle for Slife at Portland High School, and 50 backpacks full of school supplies valued at $2,500 from Barry Dunn, the accounting and consulting firm here in Portland. We're very grateful to both of these contributors for the generous support to the work of the Portland Public Schools. As you heard from Chair Figdor, we also have a quarterly update on the work of the Foundation for Portland Public Schools, and I'm happy to welcome Foundation Executive Director Andy Weissman-Summers to give the report. Andy?
Thank you, Superintendent Botana. I am aware of the time. I will try to present briefly because I know that there are quite a few other items on the agenda. So I believe you can see the slides now. Is that correct? Super. Thank you. So I wanted to start just by sharing with this group that early in the summer, we did, as a foundation, update our mission, vision, and goals in an effort to show our growth and expansion and kind of some of the new directions the foundation has been moving. I won't read through all of those, but just to read our mission statement, the mission of the Foundation for Portland Public Schools is to be a catalyst for increased educational opportunities, achievement, and equity for all Portland Public Schools students and staff. So to give you some quick updates, about 2 weeks ago now, we relaunched our Addressing the Opportunity Gap campaign. And I wrote at the time of submitting these slides about 4 days ago that we had raised over $4,500 in individual donations. That number is now over $7,500 in 2 weeks, which is exciting. And that's just individuals donating, not business and foundation donations or grants, which is very exciting. We're working hard to expand our reach so that the community knows that the Foundation for Portland Public Schools exists. This year, we were able to reach out by email to all Portland Public Schools families, which was very exciting. We're in the process of creating a video to tell our story and impact, and a flyer as well, if any of you are interested. We're just now completing our first external audit, and we welcome 3 new board members to our board of directors. That's Naomi Mayavanga Maku, who's a junior at Deering, Jane Phelan, and Melissa Knoll. We also thank our major donors at each of our quarterly reports. So again, I won't read these. We classify a major donor as a donor with a donation of a value of over $1,000. So this is the fall list of those donations. And I always like to thank as well, although we have major donors, what feels very important is that we have a big base of people who are collectively committed to making the Portland Public Schools even better. And I think in part because we were able to reach out to the entire school community this year, we've had 109 new donors throughout the summer and fall, which feels like a very significant number to us. And those new donors have made contributions of over $8,000. And then finally, the couple of items I wanted to talk about in a little more depth are our fundraising priorities at the moment. And so we've been sharing a bunch of this on social media, but we're working with Brooke Teller, the director of STEM and science coaching for the district, and the rest of the science team to try to build a mobile makerspace that will serve all of the elementary school students in Portland. And so the photo you can see there is an example of a mobile makerspace in another school district. It's not to say that that's exactly what the mobile makerspace will look like, but just to give folks an idea of what we're talking about. But this idea is that a makerspace is kind of a technology-driven, although it can be simple or quite complex tools and machinery, space for students to really grapple with problems, engage in engineering, technology, and design. And it would be very space and financially weighty to try to have a lab with technology like that at all 10 of the district's elementary schools. So the vision is that we'll create a mobile makerspace that can move between the schools and give all of the students a chance to have access to that kind of technology and experiences for next year. So that's something the foundation is committed to trying to build and outfit during this school year. And one thing that's happened recently is that Town and Country Federal Credit Union, which is a local bank, has something called the Better Neighbor Fund. And the mobile makerspace is one of the projects in this contest, the Better Neighbor Fund. So I encourage everyone listening and to spread the word. You can go on to their website, TCFCU, Town and Country Federal Credit Union, and you can vote for Portland Public Schools mobile makerspace. It's free. You don't need to log in. You provide an email and just vote to support that. And if we get amongst the most votes, we'll get $5,000 towards outfitting this mobile makerspace. So that would be a wonderful and easy way to help out. And then the second fundraising priority is the Wabanaki Film Project. Many of you I know have heard, and this group has talked about, that how the social studies vertical team is creating pre-K through 12 Wabanaki curriculum. And so a piece of that curriculum is a hope that they will create what they're calling an anchor text, which is actually going to be a series of videos, short 5 to 10 minute videos that can play throughout a student's years in the Portland Public Schools that will bring or amplify the voices of Indigenous leaders in Maine right in the classroom, so that folks who are on reservations, or not, talking about different elements of history, culture, any elements of Wabanaki life, historical and modern, will be able to speak directly with students and be in their classrooms. And so because creating a film is beyond the typical price, just like a mobile makerspace of curriculum development for a district, the foundation is partnering to work on that. So that's one of our fundraising priorities. And then finally, our other priorities are continued funding for our existing programming. Equity and Innovation Teacher Grants, that grant period is open now. We typically distribute about $50,000 to teachers and other staff each fall for programs that benefit or projects, materials that benefit students. Are Addressing the Opportunity Gap Fund, which is district-wide equity work, the Families in Crisis Fund, and the PPS Food Fund that you all just heard so much about. So those are our priorities, and I will stop my share. And I'm particularly interested to hear if the board has any questions about those priorities or suggestions or thoughts. And
thank you so much, Andy. I see Mr. Burke has his hand up. Mr. Burke, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, for all your work and partnership. As you got a shout out from Food Fuels Learning, we know that you're collaborating well with so many people to help move forward the Portland Promise. Just for the good of the body being Portland Public Schools and your work with the Wabanaki Studies, I just wanted to mention that the Mi'kmaq Nation is currently beginning production on a video series that they have funding for. So probably somebody knows that within our school district, but just so more people are aware that there's a piece of that larger project already underway. It'd be great to connect the dots. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burke.
Ms. Bando.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for the update. I'm just so proud of the work that you are doing on the foundation. So you have really changed the narrative about what the foundation is about. So really amazing. And I'm so thrilled about the STEM labs. This is the project as a scientist is something that I was just thinking about when we're going to come, because this is the 21st century. And when we start really bringing to a young age a student to be able to be exposed to that technology, that's exactly what are going to make them move to the direction, the high level when they're going to go to college, because we need more scientists, we need more engineering, we really need that. So this is something that we can support. I think we can spread the word and make sure that we can vote to be able to access the donation from the bank. And I think we go for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mickey. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Bando. Were there other questions or comments from the board? All right. Well, I just want to say, Andy, tremendous work. It's wonderful to see. And it's the success is very clear. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So with that, we are going to move to old business, and we're going to start with consideration and action to approve policy JEA, compulsory attendance. Is there a motion? Mr. Youssef, seconded by Ms. Russell-Better. Are there questions on, Mr. Townsend, did you want to speak to, no? Okay. And Superintendent Batana, did you want to introduce these? I'm sorry, I jumped ahead.
I do. So tonight we're asking you to approve 4 policies, which we're going to be taking in order. All 4 of these policies are being revised to respond to statutory changes that have occurred over the past couple of years. They've been reviewed and approved by the policy committee and were before the board for a first read and workshop at the last meeting. As you already did with JEA, each of these requires a motion, a second, and a vote. And as we do that for each one of them, I'll summarize the changes and take any questions that you may have. So I'm going to start with the first one, which is JEA, which is our compulsory attendance policy. We recommend the approval of the proposed revisions, which are all aligned to the current statute. The primary changes to the policy include lowering the required age of enrollment to 6 years old, and also requiring children who enroll in kindergarten at 5 years at the age of 5 to attend school. And then update for consisting naming and gender neutral pronoun usage. We do that now to all of our policies as we revise them. So.
Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. Are there any questions on this motion? Mr. Burke.
Could you just speak to particularly with the inclusion of the new 5 years of age and under 6 who's voluntarily enrolled is required to attend? What's the repercussions for if a kid isn't attending school? Is there any negative impacts of the statement?
It would
what
make
I'm looking
them,
after.
It would make them subject to the existing statutory truancy requirements.
And regarding those, are we seeing any negative impacts that are following kids that are perhaps subject to pressures due to socioeconomic status, that a truancy status or a truancy mark aggravates their life, basically?
Potentially. I do think that is, it's the stick, so it's intended to be that. It's intended to be, the truancy statute requires us to do significant amount of work as a school before a student gets referred for truancy. And then, it just basically means that we can invoke the truancy statute, which can be up to a $250 fine that if the court were to apply it. I've never seen the court apply it. We've had conversations with the district attorney's office, and they do not pursue those. So it's a referral. No consequences actually happen as a result of it, but that's not uniformly true in the state, and the legislature actually put in place that requirement. So this isn't something that we're dreaming up. It's something that is attached to the statute and that's why the policy is changing. Anything I left out there? No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Chair. Superintendent, I just wanted to clarify what the change, and thank you for the background about the statute. I'd forgotten that was why this is happening. So this is for students turning 5 by October 15th. It's that same. So what was before this change? What was the age, or was there such a?
So, the change here, there's two changes, right? One is the age of compulsory education, and that's changing to 6.
It was 6, right?
It is 6.
Oh.
It's changing to 6. It was 7.
Okay, I thought you said it was 5. I misunderstood.
No, and then the second revision is the change to the policy to say that if somebody voluntarily enrolls as a 5-year-old, that they are subject to compulsory education laws.
I missed that piece. Thanks for that clarification. It was 7, it's 6, and then if someone's enrolled as 5, then they are expected to be coming to school as a regular student. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Russell-Better. Are there other questions on JEA? Seeing none, I'm going to turn to public comment. So this is the opportunity for the public, any members of the public, to comment specifically on our changes to policy JEA. I don't see any hands, so I'm going to close public comment and move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you support approving policy JEA, compulsory attendance. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Wando?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Chair Figdor?
Yes. So the policy passes unanimously. And now we're on to the next policy. Let's get the motion in second, and then the superintendent can introduce it for us. It's consideration and action to approve policy JLCB, immunization. Is there a motion? Ms. Russell Better, seconded by Ms. Bondo. Ms. Bondo. Mr. Superintendent, do you want to speak to this one?
We're going to tag team.
Good evening, everybody. So JCLB, immunization of students. So we recommend the approval of the proposed revisions to JCLB to align with the current state statute that was passed in spring of 2019 and was subject to the referendum, since then, was affirmed and upheld. So again, these statutory changes are, it adds a requirement for the MCV4 vaccine. Most significantly eliminates the religious or philosophical beliefs exemption, and allows for districts to exclude students who are deemed kind of posing a public health threat based on not having received some of these vaccines. So that is the.
Thank you so much, Assistant Superintendent Townsend. Are there questions on this motion? Mr. Burke.
Thank you. Was it discussed including the COVID-19 vaccine for students that are of age?
We did not take that up in committee. We are seeking to just conform because of this law is going into implementation right now. So we wanted to have our board policy consistent with the state law as we move to implement that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Ms. Bondo.
So are we going to take that into consideration because if we pass these policies, so if the COVID was incorporated, is going to be retroactive to the policy as well? Is going to be incorporated in the policy, even though we voted for today?
Yeah, it's not in this revision of the policy. It would require an additional revision of the policy, and that is something that, what you could consider.
Consider. Okay. Yeah. Right. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Are there any other questions on?
Can I just be clear? The only changes that we're making to these policies are, aside from, updating the board and using the gender neutral pronouns, these are changes required by current legal changes, current statutory changes. So things like the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, if that became the law, we would absolutely do that. There is also the option that the board has to consider changing any policies, but at this time, everything that you have today is strictly because there's been changes to the statute.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Don't see any other questions from the board, so we're going to move to public comment. Is there any public comment on policy JLCB, immunizations? Don't see any hands up. Seeing no public comment, I'm going to close public comment and move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion on this motion? Mr. Youssef.
So, students who attend the enroll in distance, are they have to be in the States or they can be abroad?
Students who are enrolled in the in remote academy, we have a very small number of students who are enrolled in that, but they are subject to the same requirements at this point. They're enrolled in the Portland Public Schools. This is a condition of enrollment. Okay.
All right. I don't see any further discussion. Oh, I do. Mr. Burke, go ahead. Please.
I'll support the policy as stated here, and I'd be open to revisiting the conversation about including COVID-19 vaccinations in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Okay. By roll call vote, please indicate whether you are in support of approving policy JLCB, immunization. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor?
Yes. So the policy is unanimously approved. Next, we are on to consideration and action to approve policy JKD, suspension. Is there a motion? Mr. Rodriguez, is there a second? Mr. Burke? Mr. Townsend, will you speak to this motion?
Sure.
Go for it.
So this
Two of
one,
you are keeping me on my toes.
I know, yeah. Again, as we've said, conforming to this is a more recent law that was passed in June of this past year. So this the proposed changes here are it does add some introductory language around kind of how we view the purpose of suspension. So that piece is not statutorily required, but following on the discipline policy work we did prior to the summer, we felt that would be a useful addition here as we came back to this policy to do this. But the primary changes are that it limits the use of suspension in grades 5 and below to no more than 3 days. So that's a significant change.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Are there questions on this motion? Mr. Burke.
Just gonna keep going. So this policy doesn't address the withholding of recess, correct? That's been another part of the state statute that's.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's not here in this policy. Okay, just to be clear.
I believe it was in either JK, the student discipline policy that we reviewed earlier in May.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions on this motion? Seeing none, I'm going to move to public comment. This is public comment on policy JKD suspension. I do not see any hands up, so I'm going to close public comment and we are going to move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion on this motion? Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, as I did back in the policy committee, just give a shout out to State Rep Victoria Morales, who introduced LD 474, which is what eventually became law. And the reason that we're updating this policy is a bill that I advocated for through the process, and was really proud to have been part of the thought process and work group with Representative Morales and many other people. As board member Burke, that's a tough one too. Board member Burke mentioned, the bill also calls for the use, to eliminate the use of recess as a discipline measure. So again, this is, I think, it's something that in public schools we probably didn't see used, but it certainly it was a practice, unfortunate, in other parts of the state, and I'm glad that this law now is going to prevent that practice. So that's it. Just wanted to say that again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Is there any other board discussion on this motion? Okay, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you are in support of approving policy JKE expulsion.
Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor?
Yes, the policy is unanimously approved. I just want to correct the record that I just said the wrong policy name. So my apologies. I was jumping ahead as I have tonight. So that was, we just unanimously approved policy JKD suspension. And now we're moving on to the last of these 4 policies, consideration and action to approve policy JKE expulsion. Is there a motion? Mr. Youssef, seconded by Mr. Burke. Who's going to speak to this motion? No one looks like they're speaking to this motion.
No, I can do it. No,
Mr. Superintendent, thank you.
This is straightforward. Again, we're recommending that you approve this. It's gone through the revision process with the committee, and the primary change in this policy is that it eliminates the use of expulsion for students in grades 5 and below.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions on this policy? Seeing none, I'm going to move to public comment. So this is seeing if there's any comment from the public on policy JKE expulsion. I don't see any hands up, nor people in the room. So I'm going to close public comment and see if there's any board discussion. Seeing no board discussion, we're going to move to a roll call vote. Please indicate whether you approve policy JKE expulsion. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, so policy JKE expulsion is unanimously approved. Next, we are moving on to new business. Consideration and action to ratify the agreement with the Portland Education Association and the Educational Technicians Unit. Is there a motion? Ms. Bondo, seconded by Ms. Russell Better. It looks like Ms. Stoddard is going to speak to this motion.
Just very quickly, let me introduce it. As I mentioned
Yes,
during
please.
my opening comments tonight, we're asking you to approve a memorandum of understanding with the Portland Education Association. This MOU is an extension of the one that was developed last year in response to the pandemic and recognizes the challenges associated with operating schools under our present circumstances. The MOU was negotiated on the administration side by Assistant Superintendent Erin Townsend and Human Resources Executive Director Barbara Stoddard. I'd like to thank them and the PA negotiating team led by Carrie Foster for dedicating the time to listening carefully to each other and recognizing the importance of partnering to work through the challenges that we face. And so now I'll turn it over to Barb, and I believe also Carrie is with us to walk through the salient points of the agreement.
Great, thank you. So a copy of the highlights as well as the full MOU are attached to board docs if you want to take a closer look. As the superintendent said, this agreement is similar to what we put in place last year to address the COVID-related issues that we've been managing since March of 2020. As we did last year, we worked collaboratively with a team that included PEA and EdTech Association leadership, and as well as the district leadership to bring this document forward after we updated it. So the MOA, it's actually a memorandum of agreement, is divided into 5 separate sections. We'll just do a very brief overview. Then I'll share the mic with Carrie Foster, so she'll share a few comments, and then we'll take any questions that you have. So section 1 is about health and safety considerations. This year, what we did, instead of having a separate health and safety document, was to just follow the most updated guidelines of the Maine DOE and CDC rather than having the separate document. We agreed to get together if we have any need to deviate from published guidelines to discuss those. We're also working on a centrally located document that will outline the most updated health and safety guidelines. The second section is around compensation, accommodations, and leave. The compensation section specifically addresses efforts to mitigate these staffing shortages that we've been talking about. We have agreed to pay educators who provide coverage that goes beyond what would be normally required in the PEA contract. So this includes things like an educator giving up their planning block or their lunch, or to do coverage outside of the contract day for things like bus duties. Administrators will be asking educators to volunteer if they want to be put on a list to be on call to support this additional coverage. We'll be capturing this additional time and it will be passed to payroll. And we intend to compensate staff retroactively back to the start of the school year. The MOA also grants 15 days of COVID sick leave to employees, so staff will not be required to use their own sick time. Section 3 addresses work assignments, workday, and the work environment. This section is almost unchanged from last year. We did agree to reinstitute the weekly 120 minutes of educator time that was put on hold last year. The exception to that is in the event that an educator, a building, or the district goes remote or hybrid, that the requirements for 120 minutes would be suspended for the duration of the change in that mode of instruction. Finally, in this section, we also agreed to adjust our hiring practices from now until January 21st, which is the end of the first semester, to allow for some shortened hiring timelines and fewer requirements about who must be interviewed and the like. In section 4, which is about instruction and supports, this section also was virtually unchanged with the exception that we have reinstituted the teacher evaluation process this year. And the final section is really just simply our agreement to get together and resolve issues as they arise. So the last note is that this agreement will be put into effect retroactively to the start of this school year on August 23rd and will be in effect until August 31st of 2022. So I'm going to pause for just a minute to turn it over to Carrie Foster, who's the PEA president. I want to give her an opportunity to say a few words about the agreement.
Thank you, Barb. And thank you all for your consideration around this agreement. So I initially wrote out my thoughts so I wouldn't ramble or subject you to tangents. But over the course of the meeting, I've realized that much of what I was going to say is redundant to many of the presenters here. So I apologize in advance if my edits are a little messy. But I also want to say that I appreciate the comments from Superintendent Botana, board members, community members who called in earlier, and others who have already spoken to the idea that we extend compassion, grace, social and emotional support to our school staff as well as to our students, because we're just exhausted for all the reasons that we've talked about tonight. Regarding the MOU, which we did put together to address some of those issues, first I want to acknowledge as well that this was a team effort. And from my perspective, each negotiation session was collaborative and productive. There was also a ton of communication in the background to and from educators, building leaders, and other district leaders. And that really informed what we needed to address. So I know from national media that we're really lucky to have a staff and community and administration that is so overwhelmingly supportive of safety. We support vaccination, we support masking, we support distancing and outdoor learning as much as we can, among all the other things, again, that we've talked about tonight. I will never stop being grateful for that. Because as hard as this is, we can see from districts around the country that it could be a lot worse. And that said, I'm really scared about it's early October and I hear so many people saying that this just isn't sustainable. I was recently at an MEA meeting with other local presidents from around the state, and I can confirm what Superintendent Botana said when he talked about meeting with his colleagues as well. It's true everywhere. So what Barb just described is our mutual effort to recognize this lift and try to compensate our professionals while we also continue to try to hire. And I really want to stress that the need to continue to brainstorm about how to keep people in safe, supportive, and sustainable positions. This MOA is a big step in that process, and I look forward to ratification. I hope you'll do so tonight. It would be an acknowledgement of the incredible work ethic and heart that educators bring to their students every day, and for which I would like to loudly and publicly thank them. Thank you. I also hope that people will continue to come forward with ideas around how we can use these resources we have most wisely to support our staff and students, because that's really the objective here, is to do the best work that we can. So again, thank you. And I believe we'll stay on for questions.
Thank you so much, Carrie. And thank you, Barb. Are there questions from the board? Mr. Burke.
Thank you. I have one question. I got confused in some of the reading about the 15 sick days related to COVID. Could someone just clarify what they are to be used for and by whom?
So the use of these COVID sick leave is also virtually unchanged from the allowances that we had last year. It's listed in there, but basically, you know, if people are quarantined, if they're taking care of somebody that's quarantined, if there's a short-term closure for childcare, I think there were 5 different reasons listed in there, but they're really very similar to what we had last year.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Mr. Youssef.
Was there also a change to the work assignment, the 120 minutes?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Was there a change to the work assignment, the 120 minutes that you mentioned?
To the work assignments?
Yes.
The only
educational time, yeah.
The only change to the work assignments is for people who are on a different assignment. If they're returning to their original location, they may not go to the exact same position. They would go back to the building. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. Ms. Bondo.
Yes, on the number 3, the work assignment, the 8th, on the just from to see if the remote learning video guidance then was update on August 24 is the one it can be. So because we so that mean that area can be used when we going in case we have to go remote. So that's why we leaving that one in that context.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Are there any other questions from the board? Seeing none, we're going to move to public comment. Is there any public comment on the MOU? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion on the MOU? Mr. Burke.
I'll vote in support of this, and I'm glad to hear that things went as well as they did in the process. I think it's what I've seen sitting at the board, particularly the superintendent and his staff and their approach and trying to do this endless problem solving since COVID began. And I'm glad that we're in a place where we're just all on that same kind of footing and approach to figure out these problems together, keeping ourselves centered in the needs of our students while also caring for and supporting our staff in doing so. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Is there any other board discussion? Ms. Bondo.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Mr. Burke just mentioned, because that's exactly what we are here for. That collaborative and the mean for centering exactly the value of our mission. And I think that's why we find all the time the common ground when issue is happening. And I think that collaboration needs to be valued. And we really thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Seeing no other board discussion, I also just want to thank you, Carrie, and the Mr. Superintendent and his team. I'm really happy to support this MOU and appreciate the problem solving that has gone into it, and really appreciate the commitment of our staff in the most challenging of times. So thank you. Now with that, we're going to move to a roll call vote. So please indicate whether you support action to ratify the agreement with the Portland Education Association and the Educational Technicians Unit. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair, Ms. Bondo.
Yes.
Mr. Burke.
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better.
Yes.
Mr. Youssef.
Yes.
And Chair Victor.
Yes, so the MOU is unanimously approved. Thank you so much. Okay, now we're moving on to a set of 5 policy changes brought to us from the policy committee. I know the superintendent or Mr. Townsend will introduce these for us, but let's start by getting a motion and second on the first.
Actually, these are.
I'm sorry.
They're first reads.
They're first reads.
We're going to have a workshop on them afterwards.
Yes, I got it. All right. Please excuse me as, but we're moving through the 5 first reads of these 5 policies. I'm going to read through the list, and then we'll finish up our agenda, and then we'll have a workshop on these. And then at our next meeting, we'll have the opportunity to hear about them further and ask questions and ultimately vote on them. So the first is first read of policy KLGB, law enforcement involvement in student matters. Next is first read of policy ECAD, security cameras. Next is first read of policy EBCC, bomb threats. Next is first read of policy JRA, student records. And lastly is first read of policy KI, visitors to the schools. And again, we'll have a workshop on these 5 policies having to do with law enforcement at the conclusion of our business meeting. Okay, now we're on to personnel items, consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed, election of teacher candidates, 1 year only. Ms. Stoddard, first is there a motion? Ms. Bondo, seconded by Ms. Russell Better. Ms. Stoddard, would you like to speak to this motion? No. Okay, are there any questions on this motion? Seeing none, there's no public comment on personal items, so we'll move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion on this item? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you support approving the personal items listed, election of teacher candidates, 1 year only. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair, Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez,
Yes.
Russell Better,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, so the personal items listed are unanimously approved. Next, we're moving to consideration and action to approve the personal items listed, election of teacher candidates, probationary. Is there a motion? Mr. Burke, seconded by Mr. Youssef. Ms. Stoddard, anything to speak? Nope. Okay, so we will go forward. Are there any questions on this motion? Seeing none, and there's no public comment on personal items, we'll move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you are in support of approving the personal items listed, election of teacher candidates, probationary. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair, Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, and the personal items are unanimously approved. Next, we're moving on to adjournment. So again, before we adjourn, we are going to, after the conclusion of our business meeting, have a workshop on the proposed changes to our law enforcement policies. So is there a motion to adjourn? Ms. Bondo, seconded by Mr. Burke. All in favor, just with a show of hands. It is unanimous, and we are adjourned at 9:33.